He posted one innocent-looking ad on Craigslist, but behind that screen name was a pattern of digital breadcrumbs that police ignored for months, until it was too late for his next victim. This is the story of a killer who hid in plain sight, and the evidence that could have stopped him. A case that began not in a dark alley, but in the digital marketplace of the early internet, where trust was a currency and anonymity was a weapon. We're going to trace the steps of a man who used a website designed for selling old furniture to lure his victims, and examine the critical moments where the investigation veered off course. This is a story about the gap between what we see and what we choose to see. Our story begins in Boston in the fall of 2009. The city is a vibrant hub of students and young professionals. Among them is Jalissa Brisman, a 26-year-old aspiring medical student and model, full of ambition. And there is Trisha Leffler, a 29-year-old woman from Las Vegas, trying to build a new life. They didn't know each other, but they shared a common, modern vulnerability. They were both seeking income through Craigslist, advertising massage services. Their ads were simple, professional. They were just two faces in a sea of online postings. Meanwhile, in a different world, a young medical student named Philip Markoff was preparing for his future. He was engaged, seemingly dedicated, a man on a respectable path. These worlds were not supposed to collide, but they were about to, with devastating consequences. The first known attack happened in a Warwick, Rhode Island hotel room on April 10th. Trisha Leffler was robbed at gunpoint, tied up, but miraculously, she survived. She gave police a description, a clean-cut, polite man. He had booked the appointment through email. The evidence was sparse, a shell casing, some zip ties. The digital trail was a ghost. Police treated it as an isolated violent robbery, a terrible crime, but a one-off. They had no reason to connect it to a broader pattern, no reason to look for a predator hunting on a specific corner of the internet. That connection, that pattern, would only become visible in hindsight, and by then, the clock was already ticking. Just days later, on April 14th, the scene repeated itself, but with a fatal ending. At the Copley Marriott Hotel in Boston, Jalissa Brisman was found shot and killed. The scene was chillingly similar. A massage appointment, a hotel room, shell casings from the same caliber gun, zip ties. The Boston police now had a homicide, and they had a digital clue. Jalissa's email account showed correspondence with a man using the address boston.craigslist.reply@gmail.com. It was a generic, throwaway-sounding name, but it was a start. This was the turning point, the moment the isolated robbery in Rhode Island should have slammed into the Boston homicide. But the systems were slow to talk, the jurisdictions were separate, and the killer was moving faster than the bureaucracy. Here is where the first major piece of overlooked evidence emerges: the email address. It wasn't just a random string of letters. It contained Craigslist right in the name, a flag, a signature even. Police focused on tracing it, but the technology of 2009 made that a slow process. They needed warrants, they needed cooperation from email providers. In the meantime, they missed the behavioral clue. The address itself was a declaration of method. It was a tool for hunting on Craigslist. While detectives waited for digital subpoenas, they could have been scouring Craigslist itself for other ads, victims, or reports of similar robberies. But the email was seen as a lead to a person, not as a key to a pattern. And the pattern was there, lurking. Because before Jalissa Brisman, before Trisha Leffler, there was another woman. In fact, there may have been several. We now know that in the weeks prior, a woman in Boston had been robbed in a hotel room by a man matching the description. She was tied with zip ties. She was terrified. But she was also engaged in an activity she didn't wish to publicize. She never went to the police. Her story stayed in the shadows. This is the dark underbelly of these crimes. The killer was targeting women he calculated would be reluctant to come forward. He was exploiting stigma and fear to create a veil of silence. Each unreported attack was a data point missing from the board, a chance to see the pattern, lost. Then the break. A third attack, just 3 days after the murder. In another Boston hotel, a woman was attacked, bound, but she managed to escape. She provided a crucial detail. The gunman had used a prepaid, disposable green dot credit card to book the hotel room. This was the golden ticket, a financial trail. Police scrambled. They tracked the card's purchase to a CVS pharmacy in Quincy. And there, on the store's surveillance tape, was a clear image of a man buying the card. He was wearing a bright, distinctive polo shirt. It was Philip Markoff, the medical student, the fiancé, the image of a normal life. The police moved quickly.
They arrested Markoff. The case seemed solved. The killer was in custody. But this is where the story deepens, and where the second, more profound piece of overlooked evidence comes into stark focus. In the celebration of an arrest, a critical question was left unasked. How long had he been doing this? The investigation focused on building the case for the crimes they knew about. Markoff's computer was seized. His email accounts were examined. And here, in the cold data of his hard drive, was the map of a much longer, much more calculated campaign. Police found drafts of emails, dozens of them, templates. He wasn't just impulsively responding to ads. He was systematically crafting approaches. He had folders of images of hotel room layouts downloaded from the internet. He was researching. He was practicing. Most damningly, they found records of searches and communications that stretched back months before the April attacks. There were emails to other women in other cities using similar language. There were searches for massage ads in Providence, in New York, in Connecticut. This wasn't a 3-week spree. This was a sustained, methodical operation. The digital breadcrumbs were not just scattered around the crimes of April 2009. They formed a trail leading back into 2008. A trail that, if followed proactively, could have led to Markoff long before Jalissa Brisman was killed. The evidence wasn't hidden. It was in plain sight on his computer. But it only became visible in the rearview mirror after the worst had already happened. Why was this missed? The answer lies in the investigative mindset of the time. In 2009, the concept of digital forensics was still emerging. Police were adept at chasing physical evidence, shell casings, fingerprints, surveillance videos. They understood the trail of a credit card receipt. The digital persona, the email drafts, the search histories, the cached data, was a secondary landscape. It was evidence to confirm a suspect, not a tool to find one. They were not yet thinking like the killer, who lived partly in this digital space. He understood the anonymity it offered. He counted on the fact that his research, his drafts, his virtual stalking were invisible until someone had a reason to look at his specific machine. And no one had a reason to look at Philip Markoff's machine until he was already in handcuffs. The resolution of this story is a paradox. It is both definitive and hauntingly incomplete. Philip Markoff was charged with murder, armed robbery, and kidnapping. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The shell casings matched a gun his fiancée later told police he owned. The green dot card trail was solid. The victims identified him. He was the Craigslist killer. But he never stood trial. In the summer of 2010, while awaiting trial in the Boston jail, Markoff took his own life. He left no confession, no explanation, no motive. The final, definitive resolution that the victims' families and the public sought was sealed away with him. The why remains one of the case's enduring mysteries. So, what is the legacy of this case? It's not just the tragic tale of a murderer. It's a landmark lesson in modern investigation. The Craigslist Killer case forced a seismic shift in how law enforcement views digital evidence. Today, those email drafts and search histories wouldn't just be post-arrest confirmation, they would be the starting point. Behavioral analysis units now scour the internet for patterns like this. Cross-jurisdictional databases flag similar modus operandi in real time. The stigma that kept early victims silent is better understood, and outreach is more targeted. Jalissa Brisman and Tricia Leffler's ordeals wrote a textbook on investigating internet-facilitated crime. But the haunting question remains, could it have been stopped sooner? The evidence says yes. The digital breadcrumbs were there, the email address that shouted its purpose, the earlier, unreported attacks that formed a pattern, the online research that painted a picture of a man in preparation. These were not invisible clues.
They were overlooked clues. They were pieces of a puzzle scattered across different jurisdictions, different priorities, and an investigative framework that was still catching up to the new world. The final image is not of Philip Markoff, but of a system learning from its blind spots. The true crime isn't just the act of violence, but the missed opportunities that lie between tragedy and prevention. The Craigslist killer didn't just exploit the anonymity of the internet, he exploited the gap between technology and the human ability to understand it. He operated in that gap, and for a critical few months, he lived there, unseen, until the next ad was posted and the next door to a hotel room opened. The greatest mystery is no longer who he was, but how he was allowed to be him for as long as he was.